I trusted her as my sister, but her friend had blabbed too much and things didn't go according to plan. I didn't want to believe that my wife would cheat on me, but the facts spoke for themselves. In this video, I will tell you how I discovered the infidelity and dealt with this traitor. Anna and Sergey met one spring day in a cafe. The girl at that time was in her last year at university and was sitting in an institution nearby, as she was waiting for her supervisor to be free. Sergey went to have lunch at the first cafe he could find. He had recently switched from his old job to a better paying one, so he did not yet know very well what was next to the office. Sergey was 10 years older than Anna and looked very respectable, so she was flattered when he asked if he could keep her company and get acquainted. They struck up a conversation, and the relationship developed very rapidly from there. 6 months later, they moved in together, and 3 months later they got married. Now Anne lived not in an old shabby dormitory, but in a cozy apartment of her husband. Sergey said that she should not hurry to look for a job if she was not sure he would take care of everything. Anne gratefully accepted this offer, and for a while decided to take a break from everything and just relax. Such a vacation dragged on for several years, but her husband was not against it. One night at dinner, Anne warned Sergey that next week she would be going to a birthday party for her best friend, with whom they had been friends since freshman year. Lyuba decided to gather her friends in her favorite cafe. Sergey was not against it. He was already used to him and his wife having separate vacations with their friends, so he agreed to sit with his companions that same evening. On Friday night, Anne put on her favorite holiday dress and headed out to meet her. Her friends were already waiting for her at the table. They greeted her happily, and then they all congratulated the birthday girl. In the middle of the evening, when not too little had been drunk, the friends saw two guys who had studied at the same university enter the same cafe. It was Kostya and Sasha, two brothers. Anna and Lyuba looked at each other a lot. They were both crazy about them from the very first year and were constantly thinking of ways to attract the attention of the first handsome men of the institute. Lyuba was in love with Sasha, and Anna sighed for Kostya. But the relationship between them never worked out. Then the guys were limited to just a passing flirtation. A couple of minutes later, the brothers also spotted the two girlfriends. They recognized their former classmates. The guys took the initiative and approached them and started a conversation. They offered to get a drink, and they were no longer strangers to each other, but good old acquaintances. About 2 hours passed during this conversation. It was now 11 o'clock, and the other girls began to leave quietly. They all had husbands or boyfriends, and it was time to go home. Lyuba was actively flirting with Alexander the whole evening. It was clear that they had found some common ground, and her friend was having a good time on her birthday. Anya herself also chatted with Kostya, but tried to behave more modestly. She did not want anyone from the company to spread rumors about her. Of course, she enjoyed the man's company. Everything that was happening was like a dream. She had been unrequitedly in love with Kostya for so long, and as a student she could not even imagine that one day they would talk about something so easily and smile at each other. At one point, Anya caught her friend's sly gaze. At that moment, her companion whispered something in her ear. The woman looked questioningly at her friend, and the latter approached her. "Guys, everyone is leaving, and I do not want to stop the party. I suggest the four of us go to my house. On the way, we buy something else to drink," cheerfully said Lyuba. After these words, the two brothers happily nodded their heads in agreement. But Anya became very tense. She knew that the situation was slippery. She had a husband, and all these joint meetings with the guys would not look very decent. For a couple of minutes, she shivered while the others persuaded her. The voice of conscience eventually drowned out the alcohol. The booze hit her head, and she gave in to the entreaties after all. They took a cab and drove to Lyuba's house. On the way, Kostya already confidently stroked the knee sitting next to Anya, and she did not mind, decided to let the situation go. At home, the guys hopped a drink, put on some music, and their little group resumed their fun. About an hour later, The heroine of the occasion sat down with her quite drunk friend and conspiratorially said, "Anya, we have a great offer." It turned out Sasha offered her a threesome with his brother. But Luba thought, since Kostya had long liked Anya, that she too would want to join them. Anya looked at her close friend as if she were a stranger. How could she even think of such a thing? On the other hand, she could not help but notice how her former love in the person of Kostya looked at her all evening, eating her eyes. And she was pleased by such attention. At some point, her drunken consciousness began to draw explicit pictures in her head of Annie being with Kostya together. Luba was whipping up all the despair for the adventure, and in her head Anya brought sense. When else would she get a chance like this? Her husband is very conservative, preferring only the most boring and proven scenarios. And how will he know about what happened this evening? It's a one-time thing after all. She drained her glass and gulped to be brave. "Let's try it," she said, and everyone present smiled. When it was over, Anya quickly took a shower, got dressed, and went home. She was lucky. She arrived before her husband and could now pretend to have gone to bed long ago, which she did. Sergei did not arrive home until half an hour later. He saw that his wife was already asleep, quickly washed his face, and went to bed too. He did not notice anything strange that evening. A month passed. One day Seryoza said that his friends were going to spend the weekend at the cottages in the country and called them together. Anya had only seen her spouse's company a couple of times. Everyone there was much older than her, and she wasn't very comfortable being with them for long. Her wife agreed to go, but asked to take Luba with her, so she would not be confused in unfamiliar company. Everyone there had been drinking and conversation began to ease up. Unexpectedly, someone suggested we play a game called I Never. One by one, you had to say what you have never done in your life. And if someone was found who had done it before, he had to drink. The company had a good time. Everyone laughed until one of the friends said that he had never been intimate with more than one partner at a time in his life. Everyone started looking around embarrassedly, but only Luba drained the shot. Oh, interested, all stretched out and immediately began to pour more questions. Sergei, who was going to drive in the morning, did not drink that night and watched the game only from a distance. He looked at his wife after such a revelation of her friend, and Anna at this moment looked away and blushed heavily. Sergei continued to look at his wife bewildered. But Luba, apparently, liked to be in the spotlight, so Anna began to share the details of that evening. But it was my birthday. I had a crush on this guy back at university. He was with his brother, and I thought it was worth a try. Then something clicked in Sergei's head. Could it have been recently after the very holiday his wife had gone to? Otherwise, why was she so embarrassed by her friend's words and did not say anything about him at all after the party? When everyone was quite drunk and Luba was trying to flirt with one unmarried guest, Sergei came up to her and distracted her from this activity. He saw that the woman in such a state had little control over what she said, so he began to ask her about her last birthday and what happened afterwards. It didn't take him long. His friend cracked, giving Anya away for what she had done. Sergei left the cottage alone. He didn't want to see his wife again after learning such details about her. He drove home with the firm intention of parting with Anya forever. To doubt and delay the man did not hesitate. Soon the couple actually divorced. Anya tried to apologize and make amends, but everything had already been decided. She and all her belongings were kicked out of Sergei's apartment. She asked to live with her friend for a while, and Luba could not refuse her. The woman thought the divorce was the worst thing that had happened to her lately. But then something else happened. It turned out that Kostya and Sasha did not keep their experiment that night a secret, as they had agreed. On the contrary, they proudly told everyone they knew about it. And here the women were in for a surprise. Soon they began to receive letters and phone calls from men they did not know, with all kinds of indecent proposals. There were so many of these calls that soon her friends even had to change their numbers. Since her husband no longer supported Anya, she had to look for a job. As it turned out, with a degree but no experience, she was not the most desirable candidate in her field. So for a while she had to take a job as a cashier at a nearby store. After several exhausting shifts, she came home, collapsed on her bed, and cried. She realized how foolish she had been. Just out of curiosity and a desire to try new things, she had lost a man who cared and loved her. She regretted her action for a long time, but she alas could not turn back time. My wife's perverted fantasies were stronger than our love, and she began to cheat on me with everyone she could imagine. I couldn't watch her use our marriage for her dirty games anymore and decided it was time for revenge. Eventually, I found a way to lead her into an ambush, and now she knows that treason has its price. Look how I got my revenge on my cheating wife who used me as her sexual experiment. Ludmila and Alexei had been married for 5 years. Before that they had been dating for a couple of years, and then during a joint vacation at the sea Luda received the coveted proposal of marriage. The wife had a large group of friends from her university days. They liked to get together to go on vacation and go to concerts. From the very beginning, Alexei did not fit into that group. He wasn't particularly interested in all of their parties. He was a pretty private person. Once every few months, he would go with his wife to these meetings, but for the most part, she did not insist, seeing that he was not very comfortable with them. At first, Luda was angry at her husband for refusing to go with her. She called Lyusha very boring, but then she realized that it was useless to fight it. One day, another meeting with friends, to which Lyusha did not go as usual, had an unexpected surprise. Their mutual friend Murat, whom they had not seen for many years because he had gone abroad for work, suddenly visited them and came to the apartment where they were meeting for the weekend. Everyone present was very fond of Murat. He was the soul of the company, always able to tell something funny or interesting. And before, when he arranged general meetings, all the attention in the room was always focused on him. It turned out that his work contract was up, and while he was thinking about extending it or not, the man took a vacation and came to his hometown. All night long, all his friends asked Murat lively questions about his life in the European country, about the events he had experienced. Luda did not take her eyes off the man. During this time that they had not seen each other, he had changed greatly. He had become more handsome, pumped up, and did not lose his charm and charisma. Murat was pleased with this reaction from everyone, but especially people. Once upon a time, they could have started a relationship, but fate turned out differently. At someone's birthday party, they had a drink, got frank, and found out that they had liked each other for a long time. That night, many years ago, they lost their heads and woke up together in the morning. Their relationship didn't work out because Murat had already been offered a job. The bureaucratic stuff had been sorted out, and he was leaving for another country the very next week. Luda was upset, but she had nothing to do but move on. Soon she met her future husband, and that crush on Murat gradually began to be forgotten. She never told Lyusha about what had happened between her and her friend. In the evening, when Lyusha came home, she told her husband without a care in the world that their friend had returned from abroad and suddenly appeared at the meeting. She enthused, retelling his stories as if she had participated in them herself. There was constant praise for Murat, and to some extent her husband was even hurt by the fire in her eyes that Lyudmila spoke of him. Lyusha interrupted her and made some caustic remark about Murat. The woman stopped halfway through the sentence, looked her husband in the eyes, and said nothing more that evening, except good night before going to bed. A week had passed since the previous events. Lyusha could not get thoughts of Murat out of her head. She kept remembering how much fun she had had with him. How funny he finished sentences for her, as if he could read her mind. Colleagues at work had even noticed her absent-mindedness, constantly asking if she was getting enough sleep. Finally, no longer fighting with herself, Lyudmila decided to write to Murat herself and ask him to meet her. To her delight, he responded fairly quickly and agreed. That evening, she wrote to her husband that she would have to stay at work late, so he would not have to wait for her for dinner. They met Murat in a cafe. They chatted and laughed for a long time. The woman once again felt as she had felt years ago, incredibly light and happy next to this man. She did not need any drinks. She was already drunk with her feelings. Therefore, she reacted with great enthusiasm to the suggestion to continue a pleasant conversation at Murat's house. But of course, it was not limited to mere conversation. From that day on, Lyudmila lied to her husband that meetings with her company and friends became more frequent. And on weekdays, there were always extra things to do at work. Since Lyusha did not go to these meetings and did not check anything out, he did not suspect anything. And for a while, he was completely unaware of what was really going on. One day, when Lyusha was leaving work, he decided to take a little walk to clear his head. He knew that his wife would be late again today, which meant that he had nowhere to go in a hurry. He would always have time to heat up dinner. The man was walking, immersed in his thoughts, when suddenly someone called out to him from behind. "Lyusha, hi. I haven't seen you for a long time," Kostya said to him as he came closer. It was one of Lucy's friends, who was also in a large company. The men shook hands and talked. "How's Lucy? Haven't seen her in a while either? Is she doing well?" asked Konstantin. "Don't you see each other every week?" said Lyusha perplexedly. "We haven't seen each other at home for a long time, or schedules don't fit, or everyone has something to do." The interlocutor stretched disappointedly. Lyusha looked at Kostya for a few seconds without blinking. He was trying to comprehend what he had just heard. "And when was the last time you all saw each other?" he asked. "Well, about a month and a half ago, when Murat came to visit us," replied Kostya. Did it hit Lyusha like a knock? Murat, of course, the same friend that his wife had been telling him all about. And it was after that meeting that her frequent recycling began. Now he clearly understood what were the delays at work and frequent meetings, supposedly with friends. The husband remembered that his wife was going to meet with the company again this Saturday. He asked Kosti if there would be a meeting, and he said that nothing of the sort was planned. Lyusha understood and decided to see where Lyuda was really going and catch her red-handed. On the appointed day, when his wife left, he used the app on his phone and looked on the map to see where his wife was now. They agreed that they would put this app on for emergencies. And the wife was sure that her husband would never open it for nothing, because he trusted her completely. Half an hour later, Lyusha had already pulled up to where his wife was. It was just the usual apartment building. The man parked in front of one of the entrances and waited. Not even an hour later, his wife came out of the next doorway and began glancing at the phone screen, apparently checking to see where the cab was now. She looked very ruddy. Her hair was a little disheveled. Lyusha honked at her from his car. At first, she looked at him perplexedly, as if not recognizing the car, and then very slowly and uncertainly went to her husband. She opened the front passenger door and asked what he was doing here. Lyusha calmly asked her to sit down. His wife silently obeyed him, and they sat in silence for half a minute. Lyudmila, sensing the growing tension, could not stand it and asked what was going on. The man said he knew everything. He knows that there was no meeting of friends and suggested that Lyudmila tell him herself where and with whom she was now. Lyudmila started to play the victim who did not understand anything, but Lyusha had already lost all confidence in her. He shouted at her, and she finally confessed that she was with Murat. Her husband silently started the car and drove off. Lyudmila, with fear in her eyes, asked where they were going. Lyusha replied that he was packing her things because after that he wouldn't live with her for a day. The divorce was quick. Alexei was depressed and tried with all his might not to think about his betraying wife anymore. And Luzia herself was not too upset by what had happened. She continued to meet Murat. Just now she could not hide. In her head, she had already fantasized about a strong and long relationship with her lover. Except she hadn't learned that Marat had told everyone back at the first meeting that he was back here for a while. When she learned that the dates were a week away, she said she was ready to go with him, if only to the edge of the world. The woman counted on the man to help her with all the tickets and the visa. But Marat was not the kind of man who would just pay a woman for nothing. And Lucia herself simply did not have that kind of money. She had forgotten that it was not her husband who could so easily buy or pay for something for her. For a long time, the woman was in love with Marat, corresponding with him a lot. But when she found out that he had a steady girlfriend in the country where he lived, her heart broke. And now she was left alone with her own problems. It dawned on her that she had ruined everything. A black sadness enveloped her like a blanket, from which there seemed to be no way out. Liuzita threw herself headlong into her work so that she wouldn't feel lonely most of the day. But every night she was alone with her broken heart. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think of this situation and the behavior of the characters.